Picture this. You're standing in the cereal aisle of your local grocery store. Same store you've been going to for years. Same brands, same products, same everything. You grab your usual box, the one you've bought maybe 100 times, and you glance at the price tag. And something stops you. Because that box that used to cost you $3.50 now says $5.79. And you stand there for a second, genuinely confused, doing the math in your head, wondering if you're misremembering. You're not. The price changed. And the worst part? Nobody sent you a letter. Nobody warned you. It just happened quietly while you were busy living your life. Now multiply that feeling across every single thing you buy. Your rent, your car insurance, your electricity bill, your gym membership, your streaming services, your gas, your haircut. Everything slowly, quietly, getting more expensive. Not because companies suddenly got greedier, not because the products got better, but because the dollar in your pocket got weaker. And if nobody ever explained to you exactly why that happens, how it happens, and who benefits from it happening, then this video is going to change the way you see money forever. My name is Max, and on this channel, we talk about money the way it actually works, not the sanitized version they teach you in school, not the version banks want you to believe, the real version. So grab a seat, because we're going deep today. And by the end of this video, you're going to understand something that the majority of people walking around right now have never taken the time to learn. Let's get into it. What inflation actually is, and what it isn't. Let's start by throwing out the definition you've probably heard before because it's incomplete, and it's leaving you with a dangerously shallow understanding of what's really going on. Most people, if you ask them what inflation is, will say something like, prices go up over time. And technically, yes, that's a symptom. But that's like describing a broken leg as it hurts when I walk. You're describing the experience, not the cause. And if you don't understand the cause, you can't protect yourself from it. Here is a more accurate way to think about inflation. Inflation is not prices going up. Inflation is your money losing power. Those two things might sound the same, but they are fundamentally different. And the difference matters enormously for how you manage your financial life. When the dollar loses purchasing power, every price denominated in dollars has to rise to reflect that new, weaker reality. The apple didn't become more valuable. The house didn't suddenly double in quality. The dollar became less capable of claiming value, so more dollars are required to claim the same amount of it. This is the core of what's happening, and once you see it this way, you can never unsee it. Here's an analogy that makes this click for most people. Imagine you have a ruler. It measures exactly 12 inches, and everyone agrees on that. Now imagine that overnight, someone quietly shrinks every inch on that ruler. Not by much, just a little. The ruler still says 12 inches, but each inch is now slightly shorter than it was before. You're measuring your world with a broken instrument and getting results that feel slightly off every single time in ways you can't quite put your finger on. That's your dollar. That's what's been happening to it year after year, for decades. Between 2013 and 2023, cumulative inflation in the United States ran somewhere between 30 and 40%, depending on the specific category you're measuring. That means something that cost you $100 in 2013 costs somewhere between $130 and $140 by 2023. That's not a rounding error. That's not a blip. That's a third of your purchasing power gone in a single decade. And if your income didn't grow by at least that much over the same period, you got poorer, even if your paycheck went up, even if you felt like you were doing okay. In real terms, measured in what your money can actually buy, you may well have gone backward. How money loses its value. The mechanics nobody explains. Now here's where most explanations stop and where this one is going to keep going. Because understanding that inflation exists is one thing. Understanding the mechanism, the actual engine that drives it, is something else entirely. And it's something most people never get taught. Money doesn't appear out of thin air by accident. It is created, deliberately, through specific decisions made by specific institutions. The Federal Reserve in the United States and equivalent central banks in other countries have the ability to expand the money supply, to create new money and inject it into the economy. They do this through a variety of tools, setting interest rates, buying government bonds, and a process called quantitative easing that became very familiar to many people after 2008 and again after 2020. Here's the simple version of why this causes inflation. Imagine a small island with 10 people. Each person has exactly $1, and on this island there are exactly 10 apples. Each apple costs $1. Clean, simple, balanced. Now imagine that overnight someone prints 10 more dollars and distributes them. Now there are $20 on the island, but still only 10 apples. The apples didn't multiply. The productive capacity of the island didn't increase. All that happened is there's more money chasing the same amount of stuff. So, what happens to the price of apples? It doubles. Each apple now costs $2. Every person on that island just got poorer in real terms. Not because their dollar amount changed, but because each dollar's claim on real goods got cut in half. That is inflation. That is the engine. And during the COVID-19 pandemic, governments around the world ran that engine at full throttle. The United States alone injected trillions of dollars into the economy through stimulus packages, enhanced unemployment benefits, PPP loans, and direct Federal Reserve asset purchases. The M2 money supply, a broad measure of money in circulation, grew by more between 2020 and 2022 than it had in the entire previous decade. And then, about 18 months later, inflation hit 9.1%, the highest in 40 years. And people were shocked. They called it mysterious. They blamed supply chains, they blamed corporations, they blamed the weather. But the math was never mysterious. The math was straightforward. You flood the system with money. Prices rise. Every time. Throughout all of recorded economic history. Every single time. The numbers they show you, and the ones they don't. Now let's talk about the official inflation numbers, because this is a part of the conversation that almost nobody has out loud, and it matters more than most people realize. The Consumer Price Index, the CPI, is the number you see in headlines. It's what politicians point to when they say inflation is under control or coming down or whatever the message of the week happens to be. The CPI tracks a basket of goods and services: food, energy, shelter, transportation, healthcare, and a few other categories. It produces a single number that's supposed to represent the experience of the average American consumer. And while it's a useful tool, it has some significant limitations that consistently result in it understating how much more expensive life has actually gotten for real people. Take housing. The CPI measures housing costs using a metric called owner's equivalent rent. Instead of tracking actual home prices or actual rents in the market, it asks homeowners what they think they could rent their home for, a hypothetical number based on their own perception. When actual home prices were surging 20% year over year in many markets during 2021 and 2022, the owner's equivalent rent measure in the CPI was showing something far more moderate. If you were actually trying to buy a home or sign a new lease during that period, the official number bore almost no resemblance to your lived experience. Take college tuition. A 4-year degree at a public university that cost $40,000 total in the early 2000s can easily cost $120,000 or more today. That's not 3% annual inflation. That's a complete restructuring of what education costs, compounded with debt, compounded with interest, creating a financial burden that is genuinely generational in its impact. Take healthcare, take childcare, take car insurance, which has seen some of the steepest price increases of any consumer category in recent years. These are the expenses that dominate real household budgets, and they have all run well ahead of whatever the headline CPI number has reported. The official number is a starting point. For most people living in the real world, the actual inflation they experience is meaningfully higher than what gets reported on the news. The savings account trap. This is the part of the video where Max really needs you to pay attention, because this is where the most damage happens to the most people, and it happens in the most invisible way possible. You were taught, probably from a young age, right, that saving money is responsible, that having money in a savings account is smart, that you should build up a cushion, keep it safe, and let it sit there. And that advice is not entirely wrong. You do need liquid savings. You do need an emergency fund. But what nobody told you, what the bank's commercials certainly never mentioned, is what happens to that money while it sits there. If your savings account is earning 0.5% interest and inflation is running at 4%, you are not saving money. You are losing money. Slowly, automatically, every single day, with no action required on your part. The number in your account goes up by a tiny amount. The purchasing power of that number goes down by a much larger amount. And the net result is that you are getting poorer while doing exactly what you were told was responsible. Let's make this concrete. You save $10,000. You put it in a traditional savings account. After 1 year at 0.5% interest, you have $10,050. You made $50. But if inflation ran at 4% that year, the real purchasing power of your original $10,000 declined by $400. You didn't gain $50. You lost $350 in real terms. Your balance went up. Your wealth went down. And if you repeat that for 10 years, with inflation averaging even a modest 3% annually, that $10,000 in real purchasing power shrinks to roughly $7,400. You held on to every dollar. You lost nearly $3,000 in what those dollars can actually do for you in the real world. This is not a conspiracy. Nobody is targeting you specifically. This is simply what happens when you hold a depreciating asset, which is what cash is in an inflationary environment, and expect it to protect your wealth. It cannot do that. It was never designed to do that. And the sooner that reality sinks in, the sooner you can start making decisions that actually work in your favor. What wealthy people understand that most people don't. So why does inflation seem to devastate some people while others seem almost untouched by it? It's not that wealthy people earn so much that inflation is irrelevant to them. It's that wealthy people understand a single concept that fundamentally changes how they relate to money. And that concept is this: assets beat cash, every time, over every meaningful time horizon. When you hold cash, inflation erodes it. When you hold assets, things with intrinsic productive value, things that generate income, things that appreciate in real terms, inflation often works in your favor rather than against you. Real estate is the most intuitive example. If you purchased a home for $200,000 in 2013, that same home might be worth $350,000 or more today. You didn't renovate it. You didn't add rooms. The neighborhood didn't dramatically transform. The dollar weakened and the nominal price of the home rose to reflect that weaker dollar. Your asset preserved and grew your wealth automatically as a byproduct of the same inflationary forces that were destroying the purchasing power of cash holders. The same principle applies to stocks. When you own equity in a company, you own a stake in real productive capacity, in factories, in technology, in human capital, in brand equity, in cash flows. When the dollar weakens, the company's revenues rise in nominal terms, its assets get repriced upward, and your equity value rises with it. The historical average annual return of the S&P 500, adjusted for inflation, is somewhere in the range of 7%. That's not a guarantee. That's a historical pattern, but it represents the fundamental difference between holding a depreciating currency and holding ownership stakes in real productive enterprises. Wealthy people keep minimal cash, just enough for liquidity, just enough for near-term needs. Everything beyond that threshold gets deployed into assets that work while they sleep. Real estate, equities, commodities, businesses. The middle class accumulates savings accounts. The wealthy accumulate assets. That difference in strategy, applied consistently over decades, produces a difference in outcomes that looks like luck from the outside but is really just the inevitable result of understanding how money actually works. The wage illusion that's making you poorer. Here is something that almost nobody talks about, and it might be the most psychologically disorienting part of this entire conversation. You got a raise. 3%, maybe 5%, maybe even 8% if you had a particularly strong year. You felt good about it. You deserved it. You worked hard for it. But here is the question that most people never think to ask. Did your standard of living actually improve? If inflation was running at 6% and your raise was 4%, you took a pay cut. Your paycheck contains more dollars than it did before. Your purchasing power went down. This is called a real wage decline, and it has been happening to enormous numbers of workers across multiple economic cycles without them fully internalizing it, because the number on their paycheck always goes up. The number goes up, the value goes down. And those are two completely different things. This is why so many people feel like they are working harder than ever and somehow falling further behind. Why the treadmill feeling is so pervasive. Why people who are doing everything right, showing up, grinding, getting promoted, still feel like they're losing ground. Because in real economic terms, measured in actual purchasing power rather than nominal dollars, many of them they are running faster on a treadmill that is also accelerating. And nobody sat them down and explained that this is the environment they're operating in. What you can actually do. Right now, Max doesn't believe in leaving you with a problem and no path forward. That's not what this channel is about. So let's talk about concrete, actionable steps you can take starting today. The first move is to get your cash working harder immediately. If you have an emergency fund, and you should have one, it needs to be in a high-yield savings account. Not a traditional bank account earning a fraction of a percent. Right now, in the current interest rate environment, high-yield savings accounts are offering 4 to 5% annually. That won't fully offset inflation in all environments, but it is dramatically better than the alternative, and it requires almost zero effort to set up. The second move is to start investing, no matter how small the amount. The most powerful force available to you as an individual investor is time in the market. An index fund, tracking the broad stock market, invested in consistently over a long period of time, has historically outpaced inflation by a meaningful margin over any rolling 15-year window in modern market history. You do not need to pick stocks. You do not need to understand every company. You need to begin, and you need to be consistent. Even $50 a month, started early enough, compounds into something genuinely life-changing over decades. The third move is to change how you think about income. Stop measuring your raises in dollar terms. Start measuring them in real terms, relative to inflation. A 3% raise in a 5% inflation year is a pay cut. Know that. Factor it into negotiations. Factor it into career decisions. You are not just negotiating for dollars. You are negotiating for purchasing power, and those are not the same thing. The fourth move is to start thinking like an owner rather than a saver. That mental shift from how do I hold on to this money to how do I put this money to work is the single most important reorientation you can make. Assets build wealth. Cash stored under the mattress or in a low-yield account transfers wealth away from you silently and consistently. The bigger picture. Here is what Max wants to leave you with. And it's the thing that most finance channels won't say because it makes people uncomfortable, and it sounds political even though it's really just factual. The system is not broken. The system is functioning exactly as it was designed to function. Moderate inflation serves the interests of large borrowers, and governments, which carry the largest debt loads on the planet, are the largest borrowers of all. Inflation slowly erodes the real burden of debt. It incentivizes spending and investment over hoarding, and it quietly, consistently transfers wealth from people who hold cash to people who hold assets. Whether you think that's just or unjust is a conversation worth having. But the first step, before the politics, before the outrage, before anything else, is simply understanding that this is the game being played. You are not powerless in this game, but you are completely powerless if you don't know the rules. And for too long, financial literacy has been treated as optional. Something you stumble into after enough painful lessons, after enough years of watching your money quietly evaporate. That changes when you decide. It changes. Not when the government decides, not when the economy cooperates, when you decide. That dollar in your wallet is going to be worth less next year than it is today. That is not speculation. That is the near certain outcome of the environment we live in. What you do with that knowledge, whether you ignore it or act on it, will shape your financial reality for decades to come. The information is in front of you. The next move is yours. If this video opened your eyes to something, share it with one person who needs to hear it. And if you want to go deeper, inflation hedges, index investing, building wealth from zero, all of it, we cover it here every single week. The dollar got weaker. Your understanding just got a lot stronger. Tell me what video you want me to do next. Until then, see you.